For 2 years, my aunt told me my grandmother left me nothing, that the house, the one I grew up in, went entirely to her. I believed it. Then an envelope arrived from the county property tax office, addressed to me as the owner of record. My aunt had forgotten one thing: you can hide a will, but you can't hide a deed from the government. This is Emily, and the house is a 3-bedroom ranch on Maple Street where she spent every summer of her childhood. Her grandmother Mary had always promised it would be hers one day. But when Mary passed, Aunt Carolyn swore the will left everything to her. Emily grieved and let it go. Then the tax bill arrived, and she realized the betrayal ran deeper than anyone knew because Carolyn hadn't just stolen the house. She'd been cashing rent checks on it for 18 months. Let me take you back to the summer I was 11. Maple Street in late July, the air thick with the smell of cut grass and my grandmother's peonies. That was the summer she first told me the house would be mine. Mary Bennett was not a sentimental woman. She was a retired English teacher with a spine of steel and a filing system she updated every Sunday. But she loved that house. She and my grandfather bought it in 1962, raised my mother there, watched the maple tree in the front yard go from sapling to shade. When my mom died suddenly when I was 4, Mary took me in every summer while my dad worked double shifts. Those summers were the only thing that made sense. She taught me how to refinish the hardwood floors, how to bleed the radiators, where the fuse box was hidden behind the pantry door, practical things she said I would need one day. When I was 13, she sat me down at the kitchen table and said, "Emily, this house is staying in the family, and you are my family." I didn't understand the weight of that sentence. I just nodded and asked if I could have more lemonade. My Aunt Carolyn understood the weight just fine. She was my mother's younger sister, and she and Mary had a relationship I can only describe as a permanent negotiation. Carolyn wanted the house sold for decades. She saw it as a pile of cash trapped in drywall and hardwood. She would visit on holidays, walk through the rooms, and say things like, "Mom, this place is a money pit," or, "You know what this lot is worth now." Mary would just pour herself another cup of tea and change the subject. When Mary was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in the spring of 2021, everything accelerated. I was 27 by then, living 3 hours away and working as a paralegal. I drove back every weekend. Carolyn was already there most days, reorganizing the kitchen, going through paperwork, doing things that looked helpful but felt strategic. She started referring to the house as the estate instead of Grandma's place. Mary passed on a Tuesday in late August. The funeral was small. Afterward, Carolyn pulled me aside in the parking lot of the funeral home and held both my hands. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. "Emily, honey, I know you loved your grandmother. But the will is very clear. The house comes to me." She said it like she was breaking difficult news, like she was being gentle. I remember the exact words because I replayed them for 2 years. She changed her mind at the end. It happens sometimes. I didn't question it. Carolyn was the executor. She had the paperwork. She was family. And grief makes you believe things you would never accept if you were thinking clearly. So I let the house go. I packed 2 boxes of keepsakes, a quilt, some photo albums, a teacup, and I didn't go back. Carolyn sold most of the furniture within a month. She told me she was preparing the place for renters, that the income would help cover the property taxes. I didn't ask questions. I was just trying to survive the grief. Then, 18 months later, on an ordinary Tuesday in February, I checked my mail and found an envelope from the county property tax office. My name was on the address line, not Carolyn's, mine. I almost threw it away thinking it was a mistake, but something made me open it. The statement listed Mary Bennett as the former owner, and the current owner as Emily Harper, my full legal name. The deed transfer date was listed as September 3rd, 2021, 1 week after Mary died. My hands started shaking. I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't been notified about any deed. According to Carolyn, I hadn't inherited a dime. I sat on the floor of my apartment with that tax bill in my lap for almost an hour. Then I called the county recorder's office. The woman on the phone confirmed it. The deed was recorded in my name. It had been in my name for almost 2 years. And then she said something that turned my confusion into cold fury. "Ms. Harper, there's a rental registration on file for that property. It's been occupied by tenants for the last year and a half." "Is that your arrangement?" It was not my arrangement. I had never seen a cent. That's when I realized my aunt hadn't just lied to me about the will. She had been cashing checks on a house she didn't own. And she was about to find out that Mary Bennett had left her exactly what she deserved. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with the tax bills spread out in front of me, a yellow legal pad, and a pen. I wrote down every question that piece of paper raised. Who recorded the deed? When exactly, and why nobody bothered to tell me? The next morning, I drove to the county recorder's office. The woman behind the counter was named Diane. She had reading glasses on a chain and a voice that suggested she had seen everything. I told her my name and the property address. She typed for a few seconds, then turned her screen toward me. There it was, the official deed record. Grantor, Mary H. Bennett. Grantee, Emily A. Harper. Recording date, September 3rd, 2021. 1 week after my grandmother died, 3 days after her funeral, 2 days before Carolyn told me I inherited nothing. Diane could tell I was in shock. She asked if I wanted a certified copy. I said yes. While she processed the request, I asked a question I was almost afraid to have answered. Was a notification sent when this deed was recorded? She looked at her screen and nodded. Standard procedure. A change of ownership notice was mailed to the beneficiary on September 6th. But then she paused. Her eyes moved across the screen and her expression shifted. She said, the mailing address on file for the beneficiary notification was a post office box. Not yours. It was listed as care of Carolyn Bennett, executor. I felt the floor tilt. My aunt had intercepted the notification. She had listed herself as the contact of record, received the deed confirmation, and then turned around and told me to my face at the funeral that the house was hers. The lie wasn't spontaneous. It was administrative. She had filed paperwork to make sure I never found out. When Diane handed me the certified copy, I asked her to print everything associated with the property for the last 2 years. All title records, all tax statements, all registrations. That's when the second bomb dropped. She pulled up a document called Residential Rental Registration. The property had been registered as a rental unit since January of 2022. Registered owner, Carolyn Bennett. I asked to see the registration form. Carolyn had signed it herself, certified that she was the legal owner, and listed the monthly rent as $1,500. The tenants were a young couple named the Morales family. Diane looked at me over her glasses. Ma'am, your aunt has been collecting tax documents for this property the whole time. The owner-occupied exemption was canceled when the rental registration was filed. You've been paying a higher tax rate because of it. I took every page, walked out to my car, and sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes. My aunt hadn't just hidden my inheritance. She had been running a rental business on my grandmother's home, collecting 18 months of rent without my knowledge, and she had done it so thoroughly that the county government believed she was the owner. The only reason I found out was that the property tax office used my legal name from the deed, not her mailing address. That's when I made a decision. I wasn't going to call Carolyn. Not yet. I needed to know everything before she knew anything. I needed to find out what else she had been doing behind my back, and I needed to understand exactly what my grandmother had actually left me, because if the deed was this carefully hidden, there might be more in the will that Carolyn also buried. I drove straight to the probate court. Probate records are public, just like deeds. I gave the clerk my grandmother's name and date of death. She pulled the file and handed it across the counter. The file was thin, suspiciously thin. A standard probate case should have an inventory of assets, creditor notices, a final accounting. This file had only the petition for probate, the letters testamentary appointing Carolyn as executor, and a single page that made my blood run cold. It was a document titled Waiver of Notice and Consent to Probate. It was signed by Carolyn, and it listed all heirs. My name was on it, but I had never signed it. The signature next to my name was not mine. It was a forgery. Carolyn had submitted a document claiming I waived my right to be notified about the probate proceedings. Because of that waiver, the court had never sent me anything. I had been legally erased from the process by a signature that wasn't my own. The clerk watched me stare at the page. She asked if something was wrong. I pointed to the signature and told her I never signed this. She didn't look surprised. She said quietly, "You'll want to talk to an attorney." Then she added, "The will itself is part of the permanent record. Would you like a copy?" 3 pages. The last will and testament of Mary H. Bennett. I read it standing at the counter. The first page left small personal effects to Carolyn, some jewelry, a small savings account. The second page left the house to me. Absolutely and in fee simple, to my granddaughter Emily Harper, together with all contents not otherwise bequeathed. My hands started trembling. But it was the third page that changed everything. It was a codicil. An additional clause Mary had added 6 months before she died, and it read exactly like something a retired English teacher would write, precise, deliberate, and devastating for anyone who tried to bend her wishes. The property at 42 Maple Street is bequeathed to my granddaughter Emily with the express condition that she and her descendants in the direct line shall personally maintain and occupy said residence. Should any person, including any executor or trustee, rent, lease, or sell the property to a third party without the express written consent of Emily Harper or her legal guardian, all proceeds derived from such action shall be forfeited. Any person violating this clause shall be personally liable to the estate for the full amount of any income received. My grandmother hadn't just given me the house. She had built a legal trap for anyone who tried to use it for profit, and my aunt had walked directly into it. I left the courthouse with copies of everything: the forged waiver, the will with the forfeiture clause, the deed, the rental registration. I had enough evidence to bring Carolyn down in 3 different ways. But I still needed to talk to the tenants. I needed to know how much money she had actually taken. And I needed to hear from someone inside that house what had been happening while I was grieving and believing I had been cut out. I drove to Maple Street that afternoon. The maple tree was bare February branches against a gray sky. The porch light was on. A child's bicycle was chained to the railing. I knocked, and a woman answered. Her name was Rosa Morales. She was holding a baby on her hip. I told her who I was. Her eyes went wide. She said, "We've been paying rent to your aunt for a year and a half. She told us the house belonged to her mother and she was the owner now. She raised the rent twice. I asked if she had records. She brought me every receipt, every bank transfer, every email from Carolyn about maintenance requests that were ignored. The total was staggering. $1,500 a month for 18 months, $27,000. Plus a security deposit Carolyn had never returned from the previous tenants. The receipts all listed Carolyn Bennett as the landlord. I told Rosa I wasn't going to evict her. I told her the house was legally mine and I just needed to understand what had happened. She looked relieved but also furious on my behalf. She said, "Your aunt told us you were estranged, that you didn't want anything to do with the family. She said that's why she was managing everything." That was the final detail I needed. Carolyn hadn't just stolen from me. She had rewritten my entire relationship with my grandmother to justify her greed to strangers. I stood on the porch of the house my grandmother had promised me, and I felt the grief I had carried for 2 years turn into something else, something cold and focused. I called a lawyer from the driveway. His name was Thomas Riley, and he specialized in probate litigation. I sent him the documents while we were still on the phone. He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Emily, this is one of the most straightforward cases I've ever seen. The forgery alone is a felony. The forfeiture clause gives us a direct claim on every dollar she collected. And because she hid the deed, the statute of limitations hasn't even started running. We can freeze her accounts tomorrow." I told him I wanted to do this carefully. I wanted to give her enough rope, as my grandmother would have said, to make sure when she fell, there was no question about why. Thomas agreed. He filed an emergency notice with the county that afternoon, flagging the title so no sale could go through. And then he sent Carolyn a letter requesting a full accounting of all rental income and all probate actions within 10 business days. He didn't mention the forgery. Not yet. That letter arrived at Carolyn's house on a Friday. On Saturday morning, my phone rang. Her name on the screen. The moment I had been waiting for. And the conversation we were about to have would reveal something I hadn't even suspected, that Carolyn was already in deeper trouble than I knew, and that my grandmother's trap was about to spring shut on more people than just my aunt. I let it ring 3 times before I answered. I wanted her to feel every second of that silence. When I finally picked up, Carolyn's voice was tight, controlled, the voice of someone who knows they've been caught but doesn't yet know how much you've found. "Emily, what is this letter? You hired a lawyer. I thought we were family. I didn't answer right away. I let the question hang. Then I said I thought we were family too, Carolyn. That's why it took me 2 years to figure out you've been collecting rent on a house that belongs to me." Silence. Then a short laugh, the kind people use when they're buying time. "That's ridiculous. The house was mine to manage. Mom's will was very clear. I said I have a certified copy of the deed, Carolyn, recorded September 3rd, 2021. My name is on it, yours isn't. Do you want to try again?" The line went quiet. I could hear her breathing. Then she shifted. She said your grandmother changed her mind at the end. She wanted me to have the house, but there was some paperwork mix-up. I was just managing things until we could sort it out. The rent money was going into an account for you. I was going to tell you. Every word was a new lie, and she delivered them like she'd rehearsed. I said, so you opened a separate account in my name? You can send me the statements. I'll wait. More silence. I could hear a clock ticking on her end. Then look, Emily, things got complicated. I had expenses, property taxes, repairs. The rent barely covered it. $27,000, Carolyn. That's what Rosa Morales paid you. 18 months of rent. What repairs cost $27,000? Her voice changed. It lost the careful polish and got sharper. How do you know about Rosa? Have you been talking to my tenants? They're not your tenants. They're mine. The house is mine. The deed says so. And by the way, I've also seen the will. The actual will, not whatever version you made up. My grandmother left me the house, free and clear. And she left a little something extra for anyone who tried to use it for profit. What are you talking about? I read her the clause, slowly, the one about forfeiture. The one that said anyone who rented the house without my consent would be personally liable for every dollar they collected. I said, you signed a rental registration claiming to be the owner. You told the county you were the legal landlord. That's fraud. And the will says you owe the estate every cent. She didn't speak for a long moment. When she did, her voice was smaller. Emily, you don't understand. I was drowning. After your grandmother got sick, the bills piled up. The medical expenses, the funeral costs. I used my own credit cards. I thought if I could just rent the place for a little while, I could get back on my feet. I was going to tell you. I swear. I almost believed her. But I had spent the last 48 hours digging through every document, and I knew something she didn't know I knew. I said, Carolyn, who is Richard? The name hit her like a slap. I heard her intake of breath. Richard was Carolyn's husband. They had separated 3 years ago, but they never divorced. And according to the probate file, Richard had been listed as a cosigner on 2 of the withdrawal slips from the estate's temporary account. Small amounts, a few $1,000s each, but they added up. Richard is none of your business, she said. He's my business when his name shows up on estate disbursements that were never reported to the court. You told the probate judge there were no estate funds to distribute. But you've been making withdrawals. How much did you take, Carolyn? Altogether, with the rent, how much money are we really talking about? She cracked. Not completely, but enough. She said it was never supposed to go this far. Richard said we could just borrow against the rent for a few months. He knew a property manager who would handle the paperwork, keep things quiet. Then the rent money started coming in, and it was so easy. $1,500 a month deposited straight into the account. We told ourselves we'd pay it back. But then Richard lost his job, and my hours got cut, and the car needed repairs, and suddenly 2 years had passed, and I was in too deep to stop. I let her talk. Every word was a confession. She was admitting not just to hiding the inheritance, but to conspiracy. Richard and the property manager were in on it too. That was the more people my grandmother's trap was about to catch. I said, Carolyn, do you know what my lawyer found this morning? The waiver of notice you filed with the probate court. The one with my signature on it. I never signed that document. That's a felony forgery. In this state, that carries up to 5 years. She started crying, not the performative kind. Real messy crying. Please, Emily, please don't do this. I'm your aunt, your mother's sister. What would your grandmother think? My grandmother left a clause in her will specifically to stop you from doing exactly what you did. She knew. She knew you'd try something, and she protected me from you before I even knew I needed protecting. I paused. Then I said, my lawyer is filing a motion to compel a full accounting tomorrow. You have 2 choices. You can cooperate, return every dollar of rent plus the estate disbursements, and sign a confession of judgment admitting to the forgery. If you do that, I won't press criminal charges. Or you can fight me, and I will take this to the district attorney. You, Richard, and the property manager. All 3 of you. She was sobbing now. I'll do it. I'll sign whatever you want. Just please don't send me to prison. I said, there's one more thing. The tenants stay. You don't contact them, you don't threaten them, you don't step foot on that property again. If you do, the deal's off. I hung up and called my lawyer. Thomas said the confession of judgment would be ready by Monday. It would require Carolyn to repay $27,000 in rent, plus the missing estate funds, plus legal fees. Total was just under $40,000. If she failed to pay, we could garnish her wages and put a lien on her own house. The forfeiture clause gave us the leverage, and the forgery gave us the hammer. That weekend, I drove back to Maple Street. Rosa saw me pull up and came out to the porch. I told her what was happening. She hugged me, the baby still on her hip. She said, your grandmother was a smart woman. I told her she wasn't just smart. She was a teacher. And she taught me one last lesson from the grave. Never underestimate someone who pays attention to the paperwork. I unlocked the front door with the key I had kept on my keychain for 11 years. The same key Mary had given me when I was 16. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon and old wood. The Morales family had taken good care of it. Rosa had even kept my grandmother's peonies alive in the backyard, but there was still one piece missing. The deed was mine, the tenants were safe, the money was coming back, and Carolyn was cornered. Yet I hadn't seen the actual moment when my aunt would have to face me in person and admit what she did. I needed that closure. Not for revenge, for something quieter. I needed to stand in that house as its legal owner and hear her say the words. And that meeting was scheduled for Monday morning, in my lawyer's office, with Carolyn, her husband Richard, and the property manager all in the same room. The trap my grandmother set was about to close, and I was going to watch it happen. Monday morning, 9 o'clock. Thomas Riley's office was in a brick building downtown, the kind with creaky elevators and frosted glass doors. I arrived early. I wanted to be seated when Carolyn walked in. I wanted her to see me calm, prepared, and holding all the cards. She came in with Richard trailing behind her, and a third man I didn't recognize. He was in his 50s, with a cheap blazer and a nervous sweat. The property manager, the one who had helped set up the rental arrangement and collect the checks. Thomas had subpoenaed him over the weekend. He looked like he hadn't slept. Carolyn's eyes were red. She sat across from me and wouldn't meet my gaze. Richard folded his arms and stared at the wall. The property manager kept glancing at the door like he might make a run for it. No one said a word until Thomas placed the confession of judgment on the table. It was 12 pages. It detailed every transaction. The forged waiver, the intercepted deed notification, the rental registration, the 18 months of rent checks deposited into an account jointly held by Carolyn and Richard, the estate disbursements diverted for personal use. Total owed, $41,372. Payable in 30 days, or wage garnishment and property liens would begin. Carolyn read it slowly. Her hand trembled as she turned each page. Richard leaned over and whispered something. She shook her head. He whispered again, harder. She whispered back, "I told you this would happen." Then she picked up the pen and signed. The property manager went next. He signed an affidavit admitting he had knowingly helped Carolyn register a rental property under a false claim of ownership. Thomas told him that was a misdemeanor, but the district attorney had agreed not to prosecute if he cooperated fully and paid his share. He signed so fast the pen tore the paper. Richard refused to sign at first. He said he had nothing to do with the forgery. Thomas slid a document across the table. It was a bank record showing Richard's signature on 2 withdrawal slips from the estate account. Thomas said, "You can sign the confession, or I can forward this to the prosecutor's office with a note about elder fraud." The color drained from his face. He signed. When it was done, I finally spoke. I looked at Carolyn and said, "I loved you. You were my mother's sister. You were supposed to protect me. And instead, you became the person my grandmother had to protect me from." She broke down. Not the crying I'd heard on the phone, something deeper. She said, I know what I did. I just kept thinking I could fix it before you found out. Every month I told myself, 1 more month of rent, then I'll come clean. And then it was 2 years and I couldn't see a way out that didn't destroy everything. I said, "You destroyed it anyway. The only difference is now it's on paper." She nodded. I didn't hug her. I wasn't ready. Maybe I never would be, but I didn't scream at her either. My grandmother's trap had done its work. There was nothing left to say that a judge couldn't say better. Richard and the property manager left without a word. Carolyn paused at the door. She turned and said, "There's something else. Something I was supposed to give you, but I didn't. I'll send it to you." Then she was gone. 2 days later, a package arrived at my apartment. Inside was a sealed envelope, yellowed at the edges, with my name on the front in my grandmother's handwriting. Carolyn had held on to it for 2 years, too ashamed to deliver it or maybe too afraid of what it said. I opened it alone. It was a letter dated 6 weeks before Mary died. She wrote about the house, about the summers we spent together, about the maple tree and the peonies, and the way the light came through the kitchen window in the morning. And she wrote about Carolyn. She said, "I love your aunt, but I know her weaknesses. She will see this house as a problem to be solved with money." That's why I put the clause in. Not to punish her, but to protect you from her worst impulses. If she tries something, the house will find its way back to you. She had known. She had seen exactly what was coming, and she had built a legal mechanism so precise that it took exactly 2 years for the gears to turn and deliver the house back to me. I sat on my floor and cried for the first time since this all started. Not from anger. From the overwhelming recognition of being seen. Of being loved so specifically and practically that even from the grave, my grandmother was still taking care of me. A few weeks later, the repayments started arriving. Carolyn sold her car, took out a loan against her own house, and worked extra shifts. The money came in installments. It wasn't enough to erase what she had done, but it was enough to keep her out of prison. Richard moved out. The property manager lost his license. The Morales family stayed in the house at a reduced rent because Rosa had been honest with me when she didn't have to be. As for me, I moved into 42 Maple Street that spring. The peonies bloomed in May, just like they had every year of my childhood. I sit on the porch now in the evenings, and sometimes I think about the chain of events that brought me here. An envelope from a tax office. A clerk named Diane. A forged signature. A grandmother who loved me enough to outsmart the people who were supposed to love me too. The house is mine now. Not because I fought a dramatic legal battle, but because Mary Bennett paid attention. She filed the right papers, recorded the right deed, and trusted the system to catch up eventually. And it did. It just took a property tax bill and a granddaughter who was finally ready to open her mail. I don't tell this story because it's unique. I tell it because it isn't. Every year, thousands of families fracture over inheritance. A will goes missing. A deed gets hidden. A relative decides that greed matters more than the promise they made to the person who trusted them. And too often, the truth stays buried because no one checks the public record. No one opens the envelope. No one asks the question that could unravel everything. My grandmother once told me that love is not just a feeling. It's a set of actions. Mary Bennett loved me by filing the right paperwork. By recording the deed. By writing a clause so airtight that even her own daughter couldn't break it. She couldn't stop Carolyn from trying, but she could make sure the system eventually caught her. And the system did. It worked not because it's fast, not because it's perfect, but because public records don't lie. Property deeds don't forget. Tax offices don't care about family politics. They care about ownership, and my name was on the file. The house on Maple Street is quiet now. The peonies are in bloom, and Rosa's kids ride their bikes on the sidewalk I used to ride mine. It's not the ending I wanted. I wanted a family that didn't need a legal trap to be honest with each other. But it's the ending my grandmother knew I'd need, and that is its own kind of gift. If someone you love ever prepared something to protect you, even after they were gone, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to know that the truth eventually surfaces. And if you haven't yet, please hit subscribe. I'd love to have you here for the next one. Check the description for more stories like this.